So, on the 20th of this month, it is Record Store Day, and to celebrate, I thought we'd do something a little special for this channel. Each year, record stores all over the UK and the US celebrate their unique culture by having a bunch of artists bang out some special vinyl releases of albums both past and present. In each year's list, there's always at least a few remix albums and EPs that are included, and so because of that, I thought it would be nice to do a series of reviews covering some of these records. I'll be upfront in saying I have no real record industry connections, so unfortunately I'm only able to review records that already have their music available online, meaning that there are remix albums for the likes of Harmonia, Steven Wilson and Apocalyptica that sadly I'm not going to be able to cover before Record Store Day. That still leaves us with a decent list of records that I can review though, so let's see which one's up first. Interesting. Hello everyone and welcome to the R-B-Sides, a music review channel dedicated entirely to reviewing remix albums and EPs. In this review we are indeed covering Steps as we look at their upcoming zoetrope picture disc EP, Deeper Shade of Blue. Originally a track from their 1999 album Steptacular and released as a single the following year, this new remix compilation contains 3 remixes that came with the original single back in the day and 3 brand new remixes that were created in the last couple of years. For people who weren't based in the UK at the turn of the millennium, it's hard to emphasise just how big a group Steps were over here. In a pop wasteland dominated by boy bands and girl bands, Steps were the first band who really said, why can't the men and women just hang together like in Starship Troopers? Now, as a non-poptimist, this is probably an EP that I have no business in reviewing, given that I've never been into Steps, and even with the prospect of remixes, my expectations for this project were pretty low. However, without wanting to spoil too much about this review, I have to say the results of these remixes ended up being surprisingly interesting. And as you'll hear, these 6 selections are actually kind of credible and forward-thinking and, dare I say it, experimental. So everyone strap in as we delve into this colour-coded ballad from Faye, Lee, Lisa, H and Claire, and see what inspiration they bring to the 6 artists at hand. Before I saw this EP on the Record Store Day list, I kind of forgot this track existed, although listening back to it, all those haunting memories of daytime Radio 1 came flooding back. Deeper Shade of Blue is pretty typical of Steps' approach to the high-energy pop ballad, even though, like many of their songs, it's actually a cover. The original was by Tina Cousins, one of those pop vocalists who generally seem to be about in the industry without ever gaining that much traction, apart from when she did guest vocals on a record by Sash, the Eurodance producer whose main stock in trade was creating songs with choruses that people like shouting in Tiger Tigers. Ecuador! Ecuador! I remember watching that stream, that guy at the back was infuriating. Steps' cover is very faithful to the Cousins original, to the point where it almost seems like she was used as a guinea pig for the song. There are 2 main elements of note about the composition of this record. The first one is the distinctly 90s keyboard line. This seems to take its cues from 2 notable dance tracks in the 90s. Sonically, it's got that canned marimba sound that you heard in tracks like Show Me Love by Robin S. The chord progression is quite similar, though it's perhaps a little more similar to a track like I Love You Baby by the original. I love you baby, I love you baby, I love you baby. He really loves that baby. This was pretty much a go-to pop dance sound back in that era, and thanks to the EDM revolution, it has come back into dance parlance quite regularly, just to ensure that no one has to come up with any new ideas. Arguably though, Deeper Shade of Blue's most prominent asset is the beat. This beat originates from Todd Terry's remix of Everything But the Girl's Missing. It's a beat with an interesting medium-sized energy level, powerful enough to make something seem pop-ready, but not so powerful as to make it seem you're listening to rave music on the way to work. And it basically heralded the start of an era where melancholic, wistful ballads could be underpinned with a dance beat. This wasn't necessarily a new concept, as the electro-pop artists of the 80s managed to combine desolation with a surprisingly propulsive beat in many cases. However, in the late 90s it seems like this beat from Terry managed to whittle that process down to a formula. This beat basically became a metronome for any pop song about wistful yearning. For my money, the most successful track that used this beat was a cover of Roxy Music's More Than This by Emmy. And for better or for worse, I would say that Deeper Shade of Blue kind of marks the end of this beat's usefulness in pop music. It seems like this beat was tailor-made for more restrained emotional heft, and unfortunately here Steps are kind of going for that ABBA level drama, where every instance of heartbreak warrants a call to the emergency services. In the music video you get to see each member of Steps turn into their sad sona, whether it be Jason Donovan, Sonic the Cyberpunk, The Collector, a quail about to be sucked into a jet engine, or Blanca from Street Fighter. Each of them seem to be trying to one-up each other in terms of sadness, and that makes sense given that Steps seem to be a very competitive band. Just look at the title of this track, for example, Deeper Shade of Blue. The concept of colour shifting is nothing new to pop music, and certainly many artists have tried to figure out what it means to be blue. You could argue that Eiffel 65 fully nailed the concept down in 1999, but Steps realised there was still some way to go. And it's a common theme in Steps' music as well. Just look how many of their song titles have competitive adjectives in them. Deeper Shade of Blue, Better Best Forgotten, Better the Devil You Know. It's like when Gary Barlow tried to one-up Robbie Williams' Strong by releasing a song called Stronger. Deeper Shade of Blue is a song about intense emotional flexing, and I can't really relate to it on that basis. It's only their 10th biggest selling UK hit of all time, so on the face of it, a little bit of a strange one to re-release for Record Store Day. But of course this EP is all about the remixes. In my experience, when pop songs tend to get remix packages like this, they usually comprise of boring Eurodance remakes. Is that what's happened here? Well, surprisingly, no. Okay, so this remix EP has been split into two different vinyl sides, one of which comprising old remixes, one of which comprising newer ones. The old side, as we'll call it, is entirely remixes from the original releases of the single in 2000. The new side includes two remixes that featured on the Platinum Collection in 2022, and a brand new remix that's been created specifically for the upcoming Record Store Day release. Kicking off the old side, we have got the Sleaze Sisters Anthem mix. Sleaze Sisters were a production group created by Paul Masterson, seen here struggling to get comfortable in a chair, before ultimately being surrounded by security and thrown out of DFS. I don't think they're still active. The only way I could access their website was via Wayback Machine. It's pretty fancy. This collection of non-siblings basically made a name for themselves by doing dance remixes of pop tracks, with an earlier example being their remix of the Blind Date theme. For those too young to remember, Blind Date was basically the 90s equivalent of Tinder. It was much slower, much more inefficient. Instead of a swipe, you had to wait for a massive door to open. You lot don't know how good you've got it, really. Their remix work in 2000 was basically a who's who of UK pop. They did remixes of Louise, Atomic Kitten, Martine McCutcheon, and this guy. I mean, they weren't to know, you know. For me, their most enjoyable remix is of a cover of all things, La Bamba by another co-ed pop group called All Sorts. Not sure what it is, but something about the La Bamba chord sequence really lends itself to Eurotrance. This remix actually isn't available on YouTube, so I want to thank my friend Rick for sending me a copy of it. He runs a regular radio show on Mixcloud called The Blender, which you should very much check out if you are into mind-melting mashups. So yeah, the Sleaze Sisters have a pretty straightforward formula for their remixes, but you wouldn't know it from listening to this Steps remix. It starts unassuming enough with this kind of soulful string intro. Which very much seems like it could go into full-on dance floor territory given the chance, but instead it's curtailed and a different kind of beat comes in. It's something a lot slower, a lot steadier, more in the realm of something like hip-hop of all things. The vocals are just the harmonies from the original, and they've kind of been doubled up to give them this more choral feel to them. And there's this squeaky noise in the back, which almost sounds like it's mocking the track, like it's the world's smallest violin going off. It's a really strange direction for the Sleaze Sisters to go in, especially considering that they have no previous form in this kind of genre. Although you can definitely hear the grounds being laid for this sound in the Sleaze Sisters' prior oeuvre, like Paul Masterson's own Symphon Strings for example, which is basically built entirely around a cartoonish cacophony of sounds. And then there's his mid-90s work in The Candy Girls, which very much set in motion the precedent for this kind of sleazy melodrama.
You want me to give you a ride? I'm sorry, there's something in the boot.
But it's the bounce that really gives this song its character. It almost seems to preempt a decade's worth of bass music. It's got this slow pumping quality to it, which I could even imagine some people getting down and dirty to. So yeah, as understated as this is, I can certainly see why they called this an anthem mix. The second remix on this side is the Work in Progress mix, or the WIP mix if you will. Work in Progress were a remix and production duo comprising of Steve Parker and the late Paul Waterman, who is the son of Pete Waterman, one of the biggest names in pop music, who was instrumental in Steps' success and was part of the famous Stock Aitken Waterman production team, the second biggest trio of producers in the world after GlaxoSmithKline. Work in Progress were basically just in-house producers for the Pete Waterman label, and consequently most of their discography is full of Steps remixes, or remixes of similar pop bands here and there. They did a couple of remixes for the early rave outfit Atlantic Ocean, in particular their big hit Waterfall. Most interesting to me was the fact that they remixed an artist called Ron and Stimpy, with their one track Another Sleepless Night. Again, a fairly standard dance overhaul, so you'd expect the same on this particular version of Steps, but you'd be wrong. Much like Sleaze Sisters, they use this remix as an avenue to go in some interesting down-tempo areas, this time more in the realms of dub and trip-hop. Got this heavy sub bass going on, and then the vocals come in with this newly played piano accompaniment. The vocals here are just from H, and I'm not sure what treatment has been made to them by WIP, but it almost sounds like Rufus Wainwright in this context. It's a really strange and once again forward-thinking combination. Remember that in 2000 the dubstep revolution hadn't happened yet, and this track serves as a reminder that trip-hop very much had a significant role to play in the perpetuation of dubstep, given that it slowed dance music down quite considerably before they did. Indeed, this combination of the almost folk-like arrangement and the proto-dubstep beat basically makes it seem like a precursor to James Blake. Like a waterfall with smoke. Although you only had to wait a year to hear an example of someone else using trip-hop beats, piano and crooning vocals. Can't stand your loneliness, no loneliness. The elements don't fit together especially cleanly in this remix, but nonetheless it is surprisingly on point. And again, another big curveball from a remixer you'd previously assumed to have been fairly standard in their approach. In fact, everything on this EP so far has been pretty down-tempo, and it makes you wonder who they're actually going to get to amp things up for the dance floor on these remixes.
Here, you can have it. Well,
Brandon Block!
bye, mate. Bye.
Yep, Brandon Block and his production crew Blockster, who between them were responsible for a whopping 65 hits. One of those hits was You Should Be, a cover of the Bee Gees song. And the other 64 hits were the ones that Bill Bailey took at the hands of Mark Lamar on that episode of Nevermind the Buzzcocks, where Brandon Block was on the panel and did absolutely nothing to intervene. Nothing worse than a complicit bystander. Basically though, Blockster's focus at the time was in disco house, all of which had a very throwback quality to it. Their most well-known remix is of a track called Burnin' by Baby Bumps, which basically just samples the Tramps' Disco Inferno and repeats the chorus over and over. More interesting to me are his remixes of the early UK garage posse The Click. There's his remix of Good Rhymes, which features one of the MCs doing some classic Tuvan throat singing. And then there's his remix of the follow-up single We Are The Click. Where the guy pulls the same trick again. Oh. So yeah, if anyone's going to drag Deeper Shade of Blue onto the dance floor, then it's going to be Blockster, and they do, but not in the way you'd expect. The track's actually built around a loose UK garage beat, so it almost seems like The Click's inspiration has worn off a little on Block. However, in terms of the melodic elements to them, they're a lot more along the lines of breakbeat trance or electro. Kinda makes me think of the sort of stuff that James Holden, Nathan Fake or Apparat went on to do. And then when the vocals come in, they're somewhat detuned and sound like they're being played in via a cheap intercom. Impressively, even though this sounds like one of the men singing, it's actually Faye's voice pitched down somewhat, in the sort of manner that you'd hear artists like Burial do in the years after. Considering this is once again in 2000, this is an incredibly fresh direction for him to have gone in. It's a style that I'm surprised Blockster didn't get more credit for, but maybe it was just too much of an outlier at the time, so people didn't really know what to do with it. You can sort of hear the limitations of year 2000 production in this as well. It doesn't necessarily sound as clean as this remix would had it been made today, but nonetheless it's really impressive and a great end to a really surprising side. The second side of this vinyl comprises the newer remixes, starting off with Project K's Hacienda mix. This remix technically hasn't been released yet, so it was kind of difficult to find a copy to review here, but I managed to find one on K's website. Project K mentioned on their website their inspirations, which include the Pete Waterman label remixes, and as you'd expect on that basis, they're very much following in the footsteps of people like Work in Progress and Sleaze Sisters. His remixography covers a similar calibre of pop artists, including Danny Minogue, Kim Wilde and Kim Wilde's brother. Yep, that's actually him. He also contributed remixes to Tight Fit's Unexpected Comeback a couple of years ago, and his 3 remixes of Kim Wilde are coming out as part of another Record Store Day release titled Special Disco Mixes. For his Deeper Shade of Blue remix, he describes how it's a mixture of disco, house and trance, and it does utilise those elements in quite an interesting way. Rather than taking individual bits from those genres, it seems to settle on a groove that's somewhere between all 3 of them. It's kind of ravey, but it also sounds grander, like almost classical, and given that both disco and trance have had significant classical connections in the past, then that very much makes sense. The most striking thing that happens here though is what he's done with the vocals. Unlike the other remixes, Kay here is working with what seems to be a very raw studio take with none of the auto-tune applied to it.
Yeah, I'm a darker shade of me, and I'm just
and it's really interesting just how small this vocal sounds compared to the original, and the sheer contrast that it has with the towering musical cacophony that he's created around it. I actually kind of respect Steps for accepting this more warts and all approach to their back catalogue in 2024 and allowing such an unfinessed vocal take, which I believe is from Claire, to be released on this record. It shows this kind of vulnerability that the original version for me lacks somewhat, so even if it's not necessarily the easiest listen, I do very much appreciate it. Then we go to the Flashmob remix, which is one of the remixes taken from the Platinum collection. The most difficult aspect of researching this remix is trying to figure out who Flashmob actually is, as they're not directly credited on Discogs and there are many artists called Flashmob around, including a minimal house producer, a Metallica-esque rock band, a chiptune producer who contributed one song to an album of 1-minute chiptune songs, and a 2010s jazz fusion band who seem to be impossible to track down. There's also a Minneapolis-based covers band and a jazz band from the UK who specialise in 1920s swing.
I'm a rainbow too now.
Although I can't confirm for certain, I believe it's one of the two jazz acts that I've discussed here that might be behind this remix. This is basically a light chill jazz number, although it goes into double time fairly quickly, and then you get Lisa's vocals over the top, which are a little bit sped up. I think the musicianship is pretty cool on this remix, but overall the effect is a little too busy. I think the urgency of a vocal just gives it a little bit of a Meghan Trainor vibe to it. Nonetheless, a few tweaks and this seems like it could have been up Giles Peterson's street. The final remix on this EP is the Steps 25 Revisited mix, which actually is a little rarefied in the Platinum collection as it's only in the pre-party edition. There are a few different Steps classics that got revisited as part of this 25th anniversary edition, and listening to this one I am very intrigued to hear the other ones at this point, because this is a completely different direction for Steps. This remix is actually by Steps themselves, and of all the different styles they could have gone with this one, the one I wasn't expecting was goth rock. Because yeah, this is some heavy shit, genuinely. What's really surprising about this is looking at the credits for this album, it's actually Steps who are playing the instruments on this. There's been previous examples of manufactured pop bands getting fed up of being accused of not being able to play instruments and trying to show that they have rock credentials, but honestly, if this is what Steps come up with when they put their mind to it, then they're very much the real deal. They even add some new vocals to this revisited mix, which kind of talk about notions of creation and destruction. And Lee's vocal performance is tailored very specifically to give that new vibe to it, which really backs up the notion that they're going into a deeper shade of blue. It's deeper than anything they've ever done before. But yeah, it's amazing just how raw this remix is. It is such a different side to Steps than I was expecting. At the risk of sounding like that Lemmy sketch where the two metal fans rock out to Aha, I honestly think if you're a rock fan, you should give this a shot. So that is Deeper Shade of Blue Remixes, genuinely one of the most surprising remix compilations I've ever heard. I came into this expecting 6 boring Eurodance remixes, and instead I was rewarded with astonishing creativity, some of which is very much ahead of its time. Favourite remix is the Steps 25 Revisited mix. Honestly, my jaw just dropped when I heard this one. Least favourite remix is the Flashmob one. I appreciate what it's trying to do, but I think it just doesn't really quite land. Some slightly off-putting elements in the production here that just means it doesn't quite cohere, but still a lot of fun ideas going on. And are these remixes better than the original? Yes, 100%. Everything on this EP charts incredibly fresh territory for this song. It's a revelation. Except it isn't, because none of these remixes that I played to you are actually the remixes from the EP. Sorry. I mean, a lot of the research that I've shown in this video is true, but the actual remixes themselves, I made those. I discovered this EP whilst researching Record Store Day, and I thought, oh, that might be a laugh to cover. And then I listened to 5 seconds of each remix that was available, and they were basically all just boring Eurodance remakes. And I thought to myself, oh, this is going to be such a tedious review. But then I thought about my Aphex Twin review, in which I talked about the story of when he remixed the Lemonheads but wasn't interested in doing the remix, so he just submitted a random tape without listening to the originals. And I thought I'd take a leaf out of his book. So for this review I just took a bunch of random tracks from my collection and I put Steps' vocals over them. The list of tracks is on screen now, and if you are one of the artists in question and you see this video, I sincerely apologise. Also, when I say I put Steps' vocals over these tracks, I actually couldn't find a decent studio a cappella of the song, and I couldn't be bothered to make one using AI or whatever, so I just grabbed a bunch of random cover versions that people had done on YouTube and I put those over the top of them instead, using modern DJ technology as it seemed quicker than using Pro Tools. Once again, these artists' names are on screen, and once again I apologise, albeit not as sincerely. Oh, and to top things off, when you heard the original Deeper Shade of Blue in this review, it wasn't the original, it was actually the Tina Cousins version. I don't really understand who this remix EP is for. Maybe I just don't understand music collectors these days, and there are people out there who will happily buy this alongside represses of Pharoah Sanders and Sonic Youth, but I just can't imagine why anyone would want these 6 remixes on vinyl for anything other than the zoetrope animation. But this channel's still new and I didn't want it to be awash with negative energy, so in order to make myself enthusiastic about the remix, I just thought, what if Steps genuinely were experimental music pioneers in some way and we all just missed it? If you're a Steps fan and you've watched this far into the video, then very well done. I very much appreciate you even if I don't share your taste in music. But yeah, that's my first Record Store Day review for this year, and the next one will be better. Thank you for watching. Please do subscribe to the channel if you want to see regular and usually much more sincere reviews of remix content. If you do have any suggestions of remix albums or EPs that you'd like me to cover on this channel, then do let me know. Anyway, this review is over. 2 months in and this channel's already jumped the shark. Jesus Christ.